Hey, welcome here again. My name is Steve Treichler. If I've not met you before, I'm glad to have you here this morning. If you went to the annual meeting, can I see a hand of both of you who went? Yeah, there we go. We had a great time discussing what we're hoping to do here at Hope in 2016, kind of talked about 2015 and where that was headed. And I want to start off by saying I'm hoping that one of the things that we are able to accomplish in 2016 is to dial up one of our passions here at Hope that for a variety of reasons, and one of which was acquiring that other building. I know many of you are over there sitting right now, and we appreciate you. We're broadcasting here from Hope Classic, and so over to the other building. And that just kind of caused a little bit of a hitch in some of the things we've wanted to really be a part of. But that is, we want to be a blessing to this city in a variety of ways. We want to see, the way I like to say it is, we want to see this city better off than the way we found it. We want to be able to say that when people walk by this building, they might say, you know what, I don't believe a word of what they believe, but I'm glad they're here. They're making a difference. And so the way we've kind of done that is we've adopted 6 partners and about, 8 other ministries that are on the varying degrees of partnership. And we're trying to, through them, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but through them, be a part of blessing the city. And so over and over, you're going to get, I hope, encouraged and also maybe tired of me talking about this, because I would love to see part of the culture at Hope is that we're thinking about how we can bless the city. So with that said, every now and then, about once every other month or so, we're going to show you a little short video of one of our partner ministries. And today, I want to show you, they're all of them are great. I don't want to say one's the best or this is what, but this one is the bee's knees. Let me tell you, I want to show you today a little short video about a ministry called, Urban Homeworks. Thank you. I want to say Adventures. That's not right. Urban Homeworks. Amazing. So let me just, without further ado, let you take a look at this. We're here today up in North Minneapolis on a nice, warm, brisk afternoon, and we have the opportunity today to meet with one of our urban partners, Urban Homeworks. We're here today with Cody, who's a development officer with Urban Homeworks. So Cody, tell us about Urban Homeworks and tell us about your role with Urban Homeworks.
The mission of Urban Homeworks, perpetuate the hope of Christ through innovative community development. What that means is that we create a network, a strategic network of good neighbors. We build out dignified and equitable housing for families, and that's all through the redemptive development of real estate. We focus on, within a 4-block area, a specific network of blocks, focus the construction development, because then you can build a foundation and network for the people development, for the relationship development.
I'm Alan Thorpe. I did Urban Homeworks, the Urban Neighbor Program.
My name is Ben Wasik. I did Urban Homeworks.
Hi, I'm Patrick Ray. This is my wife, Shelby, and we became Urban Neighbors in May.
And I was an urban neighbor during the snowpocalypse, where the snow crushed the Metrodome. And that day, my 3 guy roommates spent the day shoveling out our neighbors in the alley and on the streets, and then me and my other 2 girl roommates, we walked to Cub Foods, traversed this horrible storm to get soup for us, and we all made this huge meal and shared it with our downstairs neighbors, because I think it was a single mom that lived there, and she was working, and so the kids were home alone, and so we just got to share a meal with them, and it was just a really funny memory of trying to dig out these huge cars in a very tiny alley in a horrible, horrible storm in, I think, January. So that was one of my favorite stories.
We're here today with Shannon Jones, who's an integral part of Urban Homeworks. We're real excited to have her here with us today. Tell me about some of the ways that you've seen in your time here, Urban Homeworks just really be a blessing to the city.
The idea of just being able to rehab houses, reclaim the hope, do those is a huge blessing for this city. Another thing that is a blessing for the city is just the attention paid to local contractors, the construction training programs. Those are things that might seem small, but it's just those little things that help community development.
We now have the privilege of meeting with Trophic Burnett, who is an integral part here also of Urban Homeworks.
I can tell you so many stories of about how Urban Homeworks has been a blessing, and knowing that they're coming out of St. Stephen, Mary Jo's,
Sure.
Alliance. They're coming out of these shelters, and these babies are like, this is mine. You know, like, Mommy, we get to stay here. We don't have to share a room. You know, that to me speaks way more volume.
You have the fun part of the job.
I do have the fun part of the job.
We're very excited to have Urban Homeworks as one of the partners at Hope Community Church. They are making a significant and systemic difference here in North Minneapolis, and are excited to see the future, how we can become more involved with them as we partner with them in its spread of the gospel in word and in deed here in North Minneapolis.
Great. It was a freezing cold day when we did that video. I was a couple weeks back, if you remember. Oh my goodness, you could barely even move. So, Urban Homeworks. What I love about Urban Homeworks, anything that's blessing the city is a great thing. But sometimes you can do things that you've heard the old phrase, throw money at that problem or whatever. And you have a situation here where that is not the case. They are systemically looking at the issue of some of the poverty and education and homelessness and things like that. And as you saw, it was very, very brief, but you could see that little chicken scratch that he drew out for us about how they look at this issue in a holistic way. And so I am a huge fan of what they're doing. They are making a very big difference. If you're interested in more, over at Hope East, in the little kind of cubby there, as you go down the stairs from the main entrance there, that little cubby, whatever you would call that, the place, they're right there. And then Patrick Ray and his wife Shelby are there, and they're kind of the representatives here at Hope. Or if you just want to know more, you can go to the city. If you're not yet on the city, just email thecity@hopecc.com. It's kind of our online forum for how we communicate different things or whatever. And you can just click in the search engine, Urban Homeworks. It'll take you to this website. You say, ask to join the page, and join it. And I did it last night, and I became a member, just like that giddy up I was in. It's just going to give you more information. We would love to see this church of 1,600 people or so make a dent in this city. And so I would love for us to start dreaming about what would that look like for us as a church, and what would that look like for us as a family or as an individual, just saying, what could I be plugged in more on? You can get more information about Urban Homeworks there. Okay, I could keep going on about that. I had such a great time up there, but we got a lot to go after here. In Greek mythology, there was a guy by the name of Narcissus. And Narcissus was, it's very complicated actually if you want to know the whole story, but I'm not going to give you the whole story, I'm going to give you the basics. He was born and he was extremely beautiful. He was told that he would live either a very long life or forever, matters which kind of version of the story you read, if he never gazed upon himself. Other people were very attracted to him, and yet he scorned all of them. He pushed them away, and he kind of was very kind of cruel to them. He never let his love go towards anyone else. He never loved anyone until one day he was looking at the water, and it was very, very still. He was over a pond. He looked in, and he saw a picture of himself. He saw the reflection of himself. And at that moment, Narcissus fell in love with Narcissus. He just fell in love with himself. He says, I am perfect. And as the story would go is that, it matters again the versions you're reading because they're kind of all over the place, he then kind of shrivels up and becomes a flower. And I know, but it's Greek mythology. That's just the way it works. If you don't know a good ending to the story, just shrivel them up, make them a flower. So, and that's the way this sermon will end today too. I'm just going to, no. But that's where we get the phrase narcissistic. In other words, we look in a mirror, we look at ourselves, and we just say, I am the bee's knees. I am it. Now that's going to be extremely relevant for where we're going today. If you got a Bible with you, open it up to Luke chapter 14. We're going to look at the first 14 verses, and we're going to look at this party that Jesus is invited to. He's going to have this all the way through. Luke 14, verse 24 is going to be this same party. And in truth be told, I was supposed to cover through verse 24, but we'll see how that goes. That didn't happen. So Tim, in his graciousness, reminded me of that 3 minutes before the service. Now, on verse 24, I'm going to mention that. Oh, snap. Typo. Okay, so anyway, that's actually a good thing because we have so much to cover today. There's no way we could have gotten through verse 24, but that's fine. Let's read the first 14 verses and pretend we read to verse 24. So, here we go. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There, in front of him, was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So, taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, if any of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And they had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he'll say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you'll be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you'll be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. All right, so I got a title for the message. I'm not going to get to this title for a long time, but basically today's message is how not to be a selfish pig, or how not to be completely self-absorbed, all right? And there's a big word not there, just so everybody sees it. I put it in all caps, just so you know I wasn't saying how to do that, how not to do that. So what I'm going to do, excuse me, because we've got a lot of ground to cover this morning, I'm going to hit 3 major points. I'm going to look at this passage, verses 1 to 14. I got 3 major chunks. We'll kind of go through it. And then I want to step back and ask what I call a BQ, a big question, all right? So here's this passage. It says dinner. It's going to go all the way through verse 24. And Jesus is going to be there. He's there as a guest. And I'm going to ask this big question when we're all done with it. Okay, here we go. First thing, first part. It's this setup, okay? Okay, now, I know this picture maybe brings many pain, and you remember this even as a child. This was a big thing in my grade school. I distinctively remember the first time in my life that I had been totally set up. I was in first grade. It's funny how you think of these things. I was in first grade, and I was going to a Sunday school class. I had to go to a Sunday school because my mom was a teacher. Okay, so your mom's a teacher and all that. And a girl, I won't mention her name, Sandy Anderson, was there. And she said to me, Steve, great to see you. And that's just weird because she was usually mean to me. And so I was like, oh, that's strange. Okay, so she's going to be nice to me. She says, why don't you come over here? I got this chair for you. And she pulled out the chair, and she said, go ahead and sit down. And I went to sit down, and she whipped the chair out from underneath me. Now, I'm how old are you in first grade? What is that, about 7, 6? I mean, I naive. I had no idea. And I'm laying on the floor, looking up at the sky, wondering what happened. To which she is laughing her head off. I mean, absolutely. Now, my mom's the teacher here. It's a little awkward, right? And I'm thinking, can I get a little something? My mom is laughing. There's no love here, all right? So I was completely set up, right? You think, you trust them, you think that somebody's actually doing good to you, and they're wanting to do evil to you, right? Okay? So with that said, let's look at this setup, because this is a setup. All right? Look at these first two verses. Jesus is completely being set up here. All right? Completely. Now, I'm going to wander through this one little phrase at a time, taking 4 of these phrases and show you how this is a complete setup. The first thing we got to look is this phrase Sabbath. One Sabbath. Now, if you read the Gospel of Luke like a normal person, you would read it in about an hour, hour and a half, matters kind of how fast you read or whatever. Not the 2+ years it's taking us to go through this. Okay, so you would just kind of read it through and you'd make some observations and you'd keep moving on. Now, if you were doing that, that phrase would hit you upside the head. Luke has loved to talk about the Sabbath. And it's very interesting. If you got your fancy electronic Bible, just type in the word Sabbath and see where it comes up in Luke. It's always talked about in the Gospel of Luke as some type of controversy. Or something is happening where Jesus is, not making friends. I want to show you here, I think there's 7 different accounts of this, and just you can just listen or you can follow along on the screen. I think at Hope East, you guys just listen because there's so much here. Let me walk you through all the stuff that happens on the Sabbath in Luke, so when we get to this passage in Luke 14, you'll go, oh my goodness, okay? You wouldn't do that because we've taken 2 years to get here, but you would if you had just read the book through. Okay, first time we see it is in Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, Jesus has just come away from being baptized and then going into the desert to be tempted by the devil, and he comes out and then he goes back to his hometown, Nazareth. Verse 16, where he'd been brought up, and on the Sabbath day went in the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read in the scroll the prophet Isaiah was handed him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it was written, this is from Isaiah 61, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Just real quickly, if you remember when we were on this a few years back, whatever it was, this really says to proclaim, sent me, this is second sentence, he sent me to say to the prisoners, release. To those who have been held in bondage by blindness, release. To the oppressed, release. That was the phrase. That's going to become important later. Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone on the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Okay, so this is a Sabbath. All right, he's in the synagogue teaching. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. You ever see that sentence? That is going to radically change. If you got your Bible open, look down 6 verses. It's going to radically change here in just a second. All spoke well of him. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself,' and you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we've heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly, I tell you," continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there are many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon." That's not Israel. That's outside of the Jewish nation. "And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet none of them was cleansed. Only Naaman the Syrian." Okay, what we see in the last verse? Verse 22, all spoke well of him. And now, after he just said that, all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard that. So this goes from being this amazing, wow, this guy can really teach, to, hey, get out of here, all right? Because he wasn't congratulating their tribe. It'd be like being in Minnesota and speaking of that other football team or something. It's just wrong, right? There's just something wrong here. They got up, they drove him out of town, took him to the brow of a hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off a cliff. We've gone a long way in 6 verses from wanting to, oh man, isn't that great? Wow, Joseph's son turned out pretty good. Let's throw him off a cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. I still don't know how that's amazing. That's some kind of special effects or something. I think it was, but maybe he just walked right through, or maybe whoof, they went flying in the air. I don't know what happened, but they did. They walked right through. Second thing, it's in the same, in Luke chapter 4, you're going to see 4 different things where the Sabbath is used in a way that causes controversy, okay? Then he went down to Capernaum, a town of Galilee, and on the Sabbath he taught the people. They're amazed at his teaching because his words had authority. Now, that's a jab on the other synagogue leaders, because their words were, In a synagogue, there was a man possessed by a demon and an impure spirit. He cried out at the top of his voice, "Go away. What do you want to do? What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Son of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before them all and came out without injuring him. All the people were amazed and said to each other, "What words these are! With authority and power, he gives orders to impure spirits and they come out." And the news about him spread throughout the surrounding area. Okay? Now hang on to that, because that is going to, very shortly when we get to Luke 6 and on, is going to be a problem. Okay? Jesus left the synagogue and now he goes to the home of Simon, which is going to become one of his disciples. Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up at once, and being a good Norwegian, began to wait on them. Right? That's what she said. "Want some cookies? Want some?" Yeah. Whatever. Okay, now, but where did he left the synagogue. So what time does he do the healing? On the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath goes until sunset. And at sunset, all the other people are like, "Okay, Sabbath's over." And everybody brought to Jesus anyone who had any kind of sickness. And laying hands on each other, he healed them. Moreover, demons came out of people shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew he was the Messiah. So in chapter 4 alone, there's these 4 events involving the Sabbath where Jesus is now causing a stir in the community. Go 2 chapters forward in Luke chapter 6. It says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and took the consecrated bread. He ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, and he drops this bomb and says, "The Son of Man, I am Lord of the Sabbath. I'm the owner of this Walmart. Why are you telling me what happens in Walmart?" Bad example, but you get the concept, right? I'm the Lord of the Sabbath, and you are telling me that I'm doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath by eating, by the way, what I created to eat? Second thing, if you go on to verse 6, and on another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teacher of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. Why? Because all that happened in Luke 4 spread around. All that happened in Luke 6, he was doing this stuff on the Sabbath. And that violated their religion, the way they understood it. The Pharisees and teacher of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it?" No response. He looked around at them all and said to them, "Stretch out your hand." He did so and his hand was completely restored. But they were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. Luke chapter 6. You skip then to a few weeks ago. We saw this. This is now seventh time, and seventh and last time up until now, that Jesus is doing something on a Sabbath. Pastor Core preached on this. Great message. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Now, none of these people, except for the ones that come at sunset, none of them asked for this. Jesus says drive-by healings on the Sabbath for other people. He even asks them, do you want to be healed? Come forward. Then he put his hands on her. Immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leader said to the people, there are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath. Totally passive aggressive. He's not talking to the woman or to Jesus, just kind of out there. And then Jesus answers them, you hypocrites. Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Okay, so remember that, because that's going to follow with where we're going now. Where would you take the donkey? You take the donkey or the ox, and you take them to the well and give them water, right? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her? When he had said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. So you got to understand something here. A couple things. First off, number one, what is happening now is there's becoming a huge separation between the religious leaders and some of the people who say, Jesus is a real deal. There's that. And this causes them to even get more angry. All right? So by the time we're now in Luke chapter 14, where we are now, they are upset. And they're looking on the Sabbath especially to do something with Jesus. Second thing is, what is going on in their brains so that they, in the name of God, are rejecting God? Because he's right there. He's just right there. And they're saying, oh, you're not God. He is God. And what is going on? And the reason for that is that we talked about this when we went into Luke chapter, I believe it was 11, where there was the man who invites Jesus over for dinner, and there's a ceremonial washing, and Jesus doesn't wash his hands. And the guy's surprised, and he's, well, like, what's going on? It's because there are more than one way to reject God. When people think of how, we talked about this, and I showed this back then, people think about rejecting God, and they think that means I don't want anything to do with you, God. I'm going to live my own way. I may live immorally. It could show up in a bunch of bad stuff. But if Luke is teaching us anything, it's that there's another way to reject God. And that's by people who say, no, I want to be after God, but I'm going to do it on my terms. It's going to be through my effort. It's going to be on my religion and that I follow it. And ultimately, it's because I'm better than you. Both of these ways are rejected. Both these ways are rejected. Okay, so you got to understand, when Luke uses that word, one Sabbath, it's a loaded phrase at this point in time. Second thing, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee. Now, you might be asking, as I was, as every commentator I read was, how in the world does Jesus get invited to a prominent Pharisee's house at this point? Right? Think about that. I mean, what? It's just not going to happen. It'd be like, Megyn Kelly sending Donald Trump an invitation. Come on over, Donald, Sorry, too soon, sorry. But, it's like, really? Really? Why? And a lot of people have made things like, well, maybe they hadn't heard yet about Jesus in this particular region. It doesn't say where, it just says one Sabbath. We don't know where he is. He's on his way to getting to Jerusalem. We don't know exactly what city he's in yet. Really? Well, I think the next one, that the next two pieces to this setup make it clear. It says he was being carefully watched. No, they knew about Jesus. They knew really well about Jesus, right? If they didn't know about Jesus, you wouldn't carefully watch someone, would you? Wonder how they're going to react when that happens, huh? What are they going to say now? And you're thinking, well, okay, why were they carefully watching him? Well, because they set it up. It's a Sabbath. They invite him with all the religious leaders, the rulers of the Pharisees, and then later say experts in the law were there, and they're watching him, writing down like a lawyer everything that he's doing and thinking about in their minds. And what do? They put a prop there. What's the prop? Right in front of him is a guy who's suffering from abnormal swelling of the body. Now, if you those got like an older version of the Bible or the English Standard Version, it says the word dropsy. Dropsy. I sometimes feel I have that when I pick something up and it keeps. That's not dropsy. That's something else. Dropsy is actually an old medical term. This is for an excessive accumulation of watery fluid in any tissue or space of the body. Dropsy, mentioned in Luke 14:2, is a symptom of several serious disorders. So it's not just the fact that you have water. It's not that. It's the fact that you're on death's door. If you have this is not good. And most likely it's due to congestive heart failure, the kidneys are breaking down, or you have some type of massive liver disease. And so if you have this, and it's an old phrase, people don't use it anymore, but you don't have long to go, okay? So you got to ask yourself, Jesus is there, and then they bring this guy in. Well, he's totally a prop. Now, if you don't buy that he's totally a prop, you'll get there in just a minute. I will convince you that in just a minute. If you think, he just happened to be a guy who was there, he's one of the Pharisee guys, he's one of their buddies, and he's just hanging out with them. Hang on. Wait till the sermon's over and I become a flower. So now the tables are going to be turned. This morning I asked myself, what does that phrase mean? Table's going to be turned? That's an interesting phrase. If you turn a table, you've just turned a table. Why does it mean what it means? I guess it comes from backgammon, where if you were losing and somebody that was called the table, and if you turned the table, you would, I guess that's what one of the urban legends say that's where it came from. Anyway, something's going to happen now, and watch what happens here. Remember, they're watching him closely, and they've really put him in an impossible situation. He just has this desire to heal, to show himself off, and to be merciful to those around him, and yet he's right there with all these religious leaders, and Jesus goes, and he asks them a question. He asks the Pharisees, and now we see that there's these experts in the law who are sitting there as well, who are the religious leaders of the day. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? That's right. That's what they got. Nothing. They got crickets. There was nothing said. Nobody says anything. He did the good teacher thing. I was trained as a teacher. You're supposed to give, 5 to 10 seconds of wait time. 5 to 10 seconds of silent air is an eternity. See, you can't do it, can you? Yeah, right. So it's a long time. And there's this silence. So they can't answer. And then it says, what does he do? So, taking hold of the man, he heals him. Because they didn't answer the question, he's going to go ahead and show them that no. He heals him, and then it says he sent him on his way. Or actually, if you got a different version of the Bible, it says the word release. Remember that? That's what Jesus came for. He released him, not only from his disease, but he released him from the awkwardness of being at this dinner party. And he walks away. Now you think to yourself, wait a minute now, if you just got healed of something, and that was like, oh my gosh, you would stay with your tightest buddies. But he doesn't. He goes. He leaves, because they're not his tightest buddies. He's a prop. He was just brought along to be a trap for Jesus. And then he says to them a second question. And the second question is this. If one of you is a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day. Remember before he said he'd just taken them to get a drink? But now actually they've fallen into a well. So this guy with his dropsy, this is a significant thing. This guy's going to die if I don't do something. Would you just stand there and not do anything? Would you not immediately pull the child or the ox out That's right, nothing. Again, complete silence. They don't do anything. So Jesus turns the tables on them by completely going after them. Third part to this thing, and it's a saying dinner party. Talk now about how not to be completely self-absorbed. Here we go. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, stop right there. Remember, Jesus came in, and Jesus was invited to this promenade. It was on a Sabbath, and it said he was carefully being watched. Guess what? Tables are turned. He gets back from the healing. It's this awkward moment that Jesus is still there. Isn't that kind of weird? It's kind of like, maybe you should go now, because this is just awkward. But he stays. And they start filing in, and they start sitting on the head of the table, right? You know, it's just, I don't know if you ever had that, you know, where you invite somebody over and they just sit in your chair. It's like, yeah, get out, right? What are you doing, right? When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he gave them a parable. It's kind of a strange parable because it involves you. Mostly parables is like a certain guy had a fish and a dog and, you know, but this time, that parable doesn't exist, by the way, I just made that up. Says, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may be invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come back and say to you, give this person your seat. Then humiliated, you'll have to take the least important place. But when you're invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you'll be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So, okay, Jesus is giving, it seems like seating instructions when you go to a party, when you go to a wedding, and here's where it gets even more interesting. He says, now, he looks at the host of this whole thing, and he says, hey, when you give a luncheon, so it's kind of a different twist on the story, when you're throwing a big party or dinner or whatever, hey, don't invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back. And you're thinking, yeah, I think they will. But then you'll be repaid. Okay. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. What? Okay, so I've got this healing thing, and then I've got this, if you go to a party, where should I sit? And then if I throw a party, who should I invite? And the big question I want to close and use the rest of our time this morning with is, what in the world, how are those two things linked? Right? I'm under the presupposition that Jesus knows what he's talking about. Okay? I think we're fair. That's right. I think we're all good there, right? Can I get an amen on that? All right. Okay. So he does this thing, and then he does this thing, and I don't think Jesus cares a whole lot about parties. I mean, maybe he does, but I mean, Jesus cares about everything. Of course he does, you know. I love that t-shirt. It says, Jesus loves you. And then in small caps it says, then again, Jesus loves everybody. But Jesus cares about everything, but it doesn't seem like his main concern on the earth was the manner in which parties take place or where you sit. Why? What's the deal? So we got to go a little bit below the surface on these. How are these three things, this healing, this where to sit, and who to invite, how are they linked? And I just want to do a little bit of below the waterline. So if it's like an iceberg, that's the event, but what's going on below the waterline? So let's just think about this a little bit. Let's start with the healing. Why was Jesus invited in that situation? I think it's clear, to trap him. You got to ask the question, why'd they want to trap him? That's obviously because Jesus was a threat to them. Well, why was he a threat to them? Well, because he was a threat to their way of life, and that way of life was the thing that validated them. Well, why is that a big deal? Well, because we need to show ourselves as right and him as wrong, because the people are following him and not following us, and so therefore we can do this and we can get our people back. Well, what's going on below all of that? There's this need within them to be right, to be acknowledged, and to be seen as important and admired. Even in the healing thing. That's what's ultimately going on the bottom of their hearts. Let's take the second one. What's going on about where to sit? Well, that's obvious, right? People want to sit in the important places. Why? Because I want to be seen as important. So I sit in the important places. I don't want to be seen as not valued. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be valued, but there's something wrong with trying to do it in such a way that is manipulative and it's in view as not from God, but I get my value from others because now I'm in the right place. I'm sitting at the right place at that table. And so therefore, I need to be seen as a big deal. I'm important. Third thing, who to invite. Well, the parable tells us that don't invite your friends or family, and that seems kind of interesting because everybody does that, right? That's just a natural thing you do. When you have a dinner or a lunch, you ask your friends and your family to eat with you, right? But Jesus gives the reason why, and the reason why here is because they can repay you. Oh. So in other words, if they pay me back, it's actually causing social promotion for me, right? I take you out, you take me out, I'm on the in crowd, I'm in, right? And so I become an insider. I'm an insider now. Click, or whatever. These are my people, I'm in. And I look at disdain upon outsiders. And that's Jesus' main point here. Outsiders offer you nothing. Outsiders don't offer you anything. You're just saying to them, I want to welcome you, right? I want you, but I'm not going to get anything from you. I'm just caring for, radical idea here, someone other than myself. That's the link. The link to these things is all three of these link back to narcissism. Now, if you don't think that's a big problem in the Bible, it's a huge problem. It's the very first problem. The very first problem in the Bible, look what happened. The serpent comes in, the devil in the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3, and he says, you will surely not die. He's arguing with Eve over this. She says, if we eat from that tree, we'll die. He says, you're not going to die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. Whoa. Validating myself. I don't want to be dependent anymore. I can be independent because God knows the difference between good and evil. And if I have that, I will be self-validated. Boom. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and also pleasing the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Now look at this. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. Right? Not the first thing they do is say, they realized they disobey God. Nope. They realized they were naked. It all goes like a giant black hole into myself. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now, I know enough theology to know that if you sin against a holy God, fig leaves are going to do nothing. You need a lot more than fig leaves to prevent the kind of wrath that can come from an omnipotent holy God. But that's not what they're thinking about, because they're beyond that now. They're independent. They have got to this place, right? They have got to that place where I am Captain Universe and it all circles around me. That's why in Scripture, the worst sin in the Bible is not drug abuse, any kind of sexual hang-ups, all this kind. The worst sin in the Bible is pride. 1 Peter, in the same way, you who are younger, submit to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because why? God opposes the proud. There's other passages talks about where God does not like sin, but pride, it says he opposes it. Now, again, I know enough theology to know that I do not want an omnipotent, all-knowing God opposed to me. Very bad. but he gives grace to the humble, quoting from Proverbs 3. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up. And I think he gives how to do it. Cast all your cares on him, all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Come to him and say, Lord, I've got all these things, and I can't fix them. I'm dependent on you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. Now, I think that passage, can be used in a lot of different ways, but primarily what's it used in this context is stop being independent in everything. Because there's only one way to rightly come to God. And that's to want him, just like the person who goes religious, but they acknowledge I'm completely hopeless and I'm completely helpless. And it's only through you, Jesus, alone that I'm okay. So that's accepted. So let me close by asking us a question. Let me ask just a simple question. If you wrestle with selfishness, and every one of us does because we're children of Adam and Eve, if every one of us does struggle with this, how do you not struggle with this? And it is the gospel. It's allowing the gospel of Jesus Christ, the fact that no matter how clean or dirty you perceive yourself to be, we're all sinners, level ground. And only when I humble myself and come to Jesus Christ and not try to trap him and not try to trick him and not try to make him to be something other than who he is, but let him be him and say, you're Lord, I'm not. I need you as Savior. That is the one and only cure for a narcissistic society. Let's pray together.